What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner, and today we're going to be reviewing the Sony 20mm 1.8G. Let's get right into it. Let's start with the physical traits of this lens. This lens is practically a 24mm 1.4 G Master clone, just 4mm wider, and has a 1.8 aperture instead of a 1.4. So you already know that the build quality is going to be amazing on this. In every single way, this thing literally is a G Master lens. The fact that it's only rated at a G means that you're just saving $500 for your wallet. So yeah, I guess that's a quickie review. If you really like this lens, it's great, go get it. But onto the other physical traits of this lens. Like other G Master lenses, this lens features the declickable aperture ring, and I found that this one was actually a little bit more stiff than usual, which I both like and dislike, and let me explain. When it comes to accidentally knocking it off auto, which is when you do everything on the body of the camera and it goes directly to f22, it's much harder to do that now because it's stiffer, and especially that click from auto to f22 is stiffer than usual. So I actually found it much harder to bump it off while shooting. And this is something that annoyed me with other G Master lenses, because I'd get all my settings right in camera and then suddenly I was at f22 and I don't know why, and then I'd look at the lens and I'm like, oh, I bumped the aperture ring. So because the aperture ring is stiffer on this lens, I found myself not having that problem. Now onto the slightly negative part of this stiffness. I found that when you're in declicked mode, I just wish that it was just a little bit smoother when turning. So if there was a little bit less give, that would be just a little bit nicer, but this is just a very minor thing in my opinion. And it's very possible that it'll loosen up over time. I don't really use the aperture ring, but I know a couple homies out there really do, and they like that. So for them, it might be great, but for me, because I don't use it, this is not that useful of a feature to me, but it adds a nice aesthetic to the lens. In stark contrast to the aperture ring, I found that the focus ring was actually quite loose compared to some of the other lenses I've tested. Not as bad as some of the other lenses that I've tested, but not as good either. Somewhere in the middle, but closer to that worse end. And I'm a little bit dissatisfied by that, especially because it has a 160-degree throw, which on a lens like this is actually really, really good. You can get some nice focus throws, but because of that, and the looseness especially, when you're doing manual focus and you dial it in, those movements are so tiny and so precise, so you really have to dial it in perfectly. It's a little bit annoying for me, but I think that this lens would greatly benefit from just a slightly stiffer manual focus ring. This lens does suffer from some pretty bad focus breathing, but to me that's not the biggest issue because it doesn't really affect any of the stuff that I'm shooting, and you're not really gonna notice it unless you're doing a focus pull from practically minimum focusing distance to infinity, and that's where you're really going to notice it. But for photos or for everyday video that you're using this lens for, it's negligible. So I'm not shooting the next billion-dollar Hollywood movie on this lens or on my setup, so this really doesn't affect me, and I've never really had an issue with focus breathing on any of the lenses I've tested because it doesn't affect the kind of content that I create. Like all other good Sony lenses, this lens also features a customizable button and an AF/MF switch on the side, so you can do that on the lens and not on the body of the camera. Sony says that this lens is weather sealed, and although it is, it does not have a rubber gasket on the back, so I know that means a lot for some of you, and that might sway your decision on whether or not to get this lens. One of the most welcome things about this lens is that it has a 67mm filter thread, and I greatly enjoy that because now all of my lenses have the exact same filter size, and that makes my life much easier. And I personally feel like that this filter size is becoming the standard for high quality but small mirrorless lenses. One small noteworthy thing that I found interesting about this lens is that you can actually have a lens hood on while your filter is on, so I think that's awesome. That's the first time I've been able to do that on any of the lenses I've ever tested, so I think it's pretty cool that you can have both a filter and hood on at the same time if you need that kind of versatility. Onto the IAF test. Like other wide-angle lenses, this is not going to be the best lens for portraiture, but it does a very good job of tracking the eye once your subject is filling up most of the frame. Again, this lens is very similar to the 24mm G Master because it has that same kind of performance. It locks onto the eye when the subject is filling up most of the frame and sticks to it like glue, and when they're no longer taking up the majority of the frame, it struggles to find the eye at certain distances, which is not surprising because this is in fact an ultra-wide angle lens. Onto the video AF test. Once again, the performance on this lens is almost identical to the 24mm G Master. In terms of video autofocus, if your subject is not taking up the majority of the frame, it's not going to track it that well, but once it is taking up the majority of the frame, it's going to stick to it like glue. However, I found, just like on the 24mm G Master, the focus rack while switching between focus distances is actually very cinematic, and I really like like it, but it's not actually very snappy. So you have to give it a second before it catches focus. And once it does catch focus, it's going to track your subject very well. But again, it's a wide angle lens, so I wouldn't be using this for some crazy video tracking. This lens also features the brand new linear autofocusing motor found on the 35 1.8, the 24 1.4, and the 400mm G Master. I really like that they're implementing this focus motor into all of their new lenses because it's just great. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot in the comments and I've been getting asked a lot on social media is that the lens seems to move while it's not in use. I don't know if you can hear that on the mic right now, but yes, this is normal. Because of the autofocus system, it's on a rail system, so that means that the elements do in fact move when it's not on and engaged on the camera. So don't be alarmed if your lens seems to be shaking or making some noise. That's completely normal, it's not broken, that's how it's supposed to work. What this means is that you're gonna get much smoother and more cinematic autofocus racks, and when you're using manual focus, it's much more in line with a traditional manual focus lens and less of the bad characteristics of focus by wire systems. On to some photo samples. I know you guys are really interested in this. Most of you who are watching this are in fact photographers, so let's show off some photos. These are all photos taken with the 20mm, and as you can see, it looks great. It performs very well for a wide angle lens. Sharpness is amazing, especially center sharpness. This is stopped down to f4, and I don't really see any vignetting or any distortion going on whatsoever. So this is pretty impressive. Plenty sharp, especially in the center. If we go here, this is where I was getting super impressed with this lens. I shot this practically straight into the sun, as you can see, and flaring is so well taken care of, so well handled, it's mind-blowing. So I'm very impressed with how this lens handles flaring because it's awesome. It's just like the 24 G Master, and I really like the performance out of this lens when it comes to flaring. Here again, center sharpness, I shot this plane, this was miles away, and bam, I mean, we're pretty sharp. It's not gonna be the sharpest thing in the world because we're only working with 42 megapixels, and by nature, wide angle lenses are just not gonna be as sharp as some zoom lenses like the 90mm macro or the 85 or the 70-200. But for a wide angle lens, that's pretty impressive that we get that amount of detail on a 4:1 zoom ratio, so that's pretty cool. Here again, if we look up here, no chromatic aberration. This is where I'd expect to see a little bit here, a shiny metal building, but we have none going on whatsoever, so that's pretty cool. Again, lots of sharp details. Here, another great shot. You can see the plane, plenty of detail. This looks really good to me, clouds look great, everything looks really good to me. Here is where I really expected, let's just reset this so you guys can see, is where I really expected to see some chromatic aberration going on, and there is none whatsoever. There's no fringing of any type. This is a highlighted white metal structure, and there's no purple or green fringing anywhere that I can see. That's mind-blowing. That's some of the best handling of chromatic aberration I've seen in a lens. That's not something that's easy to hide, and so yeah, that's pretty impressive that it's able to have none of that while there. Again, on this white edge right here, no fringing whatsoever. Metal, no fringing. That's pretty cool that there's no fringing whatsoever going on here. And again, I just wanted to take this shot to show off how wide this lens actually is. I was standing maybe like a step behind this garbage can. Like, I could barely see this in my peripheral vision, and yet the lens made it seem like it was pretty far in front of me. Mind-blowing just how wide this lens actually is. Another shot, I thought this was really cool. I'm actually not that far away from this bridge, but I like the reflection with the clouds and the water, so I thought that was pretty cool. We zoom in again, no fringing. That looks pretty awesome to me. And center sharpness looks good, no vignetting. We look very good with this lens. And I did a whole portrait shoot on the other video. If you haven't checked that out yet, be sure to check that out. But as you can see, center sharpness, we're pretty sharp. Again, it's not going to compete with like an 85 or a portrait lens or something a little bit longer, but it is plenty sharp for what it is, and I'm really impressed by that. You can also get some cool leading lines with this lens, which is really cool because, you know, it's a wide angle, gotta take advantage of that. I had the lens so close to her foot on this shot, so it just goes to show you how wide this lens really is, that it can be right up against your subject and you still get that much in frame. It's crazy. Here's another shot I took at a different park just to show you just how wide this lens is. It's really cool, and again, we have all this detail in the trees here. We're stopped down to only f2.5, but still, like, we're looking sharp, everything looks good. I'm really a fan of how much detail this has, and it looks good to me. Onto a different shoot here, and I took some photos of my friend Anne, and she looks absolutely adorable, but I think that again, I wasn't that far away from her and we still got this beautiful wide shot, and she was super surprised at just how wide this came out, so I think it's really good. We look sharp here. I'm very happy with how that looks, and this is not a portrait lens, but if you want that wide angle portrait kind of vibe, you can definitely get that. Again, autofocus was doing its job here. We're really sharp. There's a lot of texture in the skin tone, a lot to work with. Again, not as sharp as like a 90mm or an 85, but you know, impressively sharp for such a wide angle lens. Here's a better example of some bokeh here. As you can see in the top left corner, we have a little bit more bokeh with the light coming through the tree, and it looks pretty circular to me, and it looks pretty clean. Again, it's a 20mm, so don't expect those beautiful, big, gorgeous bokeh balls unless you're getting to that minimum focusing distance with this lens, but it looks pretty clean to me. This lens is a great gimbal lens because of its small size and lightweight, and it means that it can be used on smaller size gimbals like my Ronin SC. I did a whole photo shoot exclusively with this lens, so if you want to see how that turned out, be sure to check out the top right corner right now or the description down below, and you can see what the results look like. I also really like it paired with the Sony bodies because it's not front heavy and it just feels really good, and it feels like what a mirrorless lens should feel like. Small, compact, but high quality, and I really like that. So why did I buy this lens? I personally really like this lens for vlogging. When I was using the 16-35 2.8 G Master, I found myself vlogging somewhere between 20 and 24, so I think 20 is a really good vlogging lens, and now that it's in a prime and it's 1.8, it means that I can get really good vlog shots and have other people while still holding the lens very close to my face, so that's really, really good. That 1.8 aperture is also really great when I'm doing vlog shots at night, so I can keep that open and lower my ISO. I personally have also been dabbling with wider angle portraits, more environmental portraits, and more landscapes, so I really wanted a wide angle lens that was high quality, and this really fit the bill. So who is this lens for? I think people who are looking to buy this lens are probably landscape photographers, real estate photographers, architecture photographers, possibly street photographers, and astrophotography photographers. I think that this is a very versatile lens in the wide angle segment, and I think a lot of people are really gonna like that because of the way this lens is built. That wide 1.8 aperture is really nice. And something that I haven't mentioned yet is that this lens actually has a pretty impressive minimum focusing distance. So you're not getting macro photography out of this lens, but you can get very close to your subject and really get that nice background blur if you so wish. So I think that just adds to the versatility of this lens. Now I think a lot of people who are looking to buy this lens are also going to be comparing it to the 24mm 1.4 G Master, or already own the 24mm and are wondering if they need to add this to their collection or sell their 24 to purchase this. And in my personal opinion, if you're debating between these two lenses, the 20 and the 24, I'd say get the 24 because it's a more versatile lens. I personally prefer that focal length over this one, and the 24 is just gonna work in more situations. So I think if you're really struggling between those two, I think the 24 is probably a better choice for you. The reason why I didn't get the 24 and I chose to get the 20mm is because I found that when I'm shooting, I tended to use the 35 instead of the 24, and the 24 and 35 were so similar in my personal use, and I prefer the 35, that I didn't really use the 24. So 20mm is wide enough of a difference from my 35 that I can actually distinctively see a huge difference, and will be using it in different situations compared to my 35. But that's just my personal preference. Overall though, there's very little to complain about this lens. This lens performs very well and is practically a G Master lens. The fact that it's only rated at a G lens just means that it's a win for the consumer, because you're saving $500 compared to the 24 G Master. And I think that this lens performs amazingly and is so close to the 24mm G Master in terms of performance that there is almost no difference whatsoever. Sony says that there is some difference, but it's hard to tell, and I don't think anyone's really gonna notice. But I wanna know what you guys think. Are you guys excited about this lens? Have you bought it? Are you thinking about buying it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and while you're there, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new around here. My name has been Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.